Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by the Secure Community Network for Securing the Synagogue, a discussion for synagogue professionals and security committees. My name is Abigail Miller, and I serve as the program coordinator for SCN. We're grateful to have everyone join us today, from our participants to our wonderful panelists. And this is the first webinar in our series of the High Holidays season of 2022. So a few notes before we get started. This webinar is in fact being recorded, and it will be made available following the conclusion of today's conversation, in addition to relevant resources that we will discuss throughout the course of today's webinar. If you have any questions, please make use of the Q&A feature, and we will work to address as many questions throughout the conversation today as possible, as well as in follow-up. There will be times towards the end of our conversation specifically for Q&A with our panelists. And a few other notes are that all attendees are off video and also muted. So again, please make use of that Q&A feature if you have any questions. So I will now turn our conversation over to Michael Masters, the National Director and CEO of the Secure Community Network, to get us started. Michael?
Abby, thank you so much. And thank all of you for joining us for today's High Holiday Safety and Security webinar, the first of the season, as Abby mentioned. My name is Michael Masters, and I have the honor of serving as the National Director and CEO of the Secure Community Network, the official safety and security organization of the Jewish community in North America. We are honored to convene today's call, which will be the first webinar of a multi-part series of webinars to address the diverse safety and security issues that we know we are going to face related to the high holidays and as we enter into the new year. I'd like to recognize the partners who worked with us to create and inform the programming for this year, partners whose organizations form the center of Jewish life during the high holiday season and around the year in communities across North America. Aguda, Chabad and Chabad on Campus, Hillel International, National Association of Temple Administrators, the Orthodox Union, the Rabbinical Council of America, the Reconstructionist Movement, the Union for Reform Judaism, United Synagogue, Conservative Judaism. These many partners and organizations informed our efforts as well as participated in planning discussions to develop this year's set of programming and the collateral material that is designed to support each of you and your synagogues, facilities, and communities. SCN was formed under the auspices of the Jewish Federations of North America and the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. I'd like to recognize these two steadfast partners who are so critical to our work, both nationally and around the country. I also wish to recognize our partners in local, state, and federal law enforcement, particularly at the federal level, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. Lastly, I want to recognize our partners in federations and the many professional Jewish community security directors and regional security advisors around the country. Coming from intelligence, law enforcement, national security, and military backgrounds, each day these experts are working full-time to keep our communities safe. Over the last 4 years, thanks to a concerted focus by our community, we have seen that network covering the Jewish community more than triple. Moreover, we are coordinating more closely than ever before, and by working together, we are stronger and more secure. We look forward to building on our partnerships to continue to ensure a strong and vibrant community. The high holiday season is one where we come together as a community, a time filled with beautiful sights, moving sounds, and the joy of reconnecting. A time to reflect on the opportunities that a new year presents. As we seek to do so, there is a harsh, unpleasant reality. We are facing the most complex and dynamic threat environment to ever face our country and the Jewish community in the history of this great nation. We have seen dramatic increases in anti-Semitism, both online and in the physical space, an increase in harassment, vandalism, and assault. As of last week, we have identified more incidents in 2022 year to date, many of which were reported by members of the community, such as all of you, than in all of 2021 via our duty desk. Please, if you see something, say something and do something. Continue to report to your local Jewish security director, law enforcement if necessary, and our duty desk. We have to keep safety and security top of mind. Working together, we can address these threats. And today's webinar and the series that will follow is a part of that effort. Today, we're going to examine general safety issues. Next week, we're going to cover firearms and houses of worship and security personnel questions. Future weeks will find us addressing outdoor and non-traditional services, best practices in identifying suspicious behavior and creating a secure and welcoming environment for all community members, whether Orthodox or Reform, Ashkenazic or Sephardic, white or Black, and whether young or old, and those with different accessibility concerns. We will address security concerns for professional and lay leadership due to today's unique circumstances. Lastly, we will hold a countering active threat training. Our program has been designed to provide all of our communities and institutions with information that they may need for the specific decision points and situations that we may confront. It's absolutely critical, as is your feedback. So as we progress, please let us know how we're doing. Please let us know where there are areas that you feel need to be addressed more strongly or more acutely. From Pittsburgh to Poway, and from Congregation Beth Israel in Charlottesville to Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, we have seen the impact of hate, and we have seen how it can be addressed. So we all know on January 15th, an armed gunman entered Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville and took 4 members of our community hostage. In the end, those hostages escaped, physically unharmed. And as we now know, the work that they did prior to that day, from assessments to making physical security enhancements to coordination with law enforcement and training, made a difference. The outcome could have been very different, but it was not, in large part because the members of CBI, the community in Colleyville, the Fort Worth and Tarrant County area, committed to action, as have tens of thousands of others in the community. Since that day in January, SCN alone has trained over 34,000 people, both in person and online. I want to recognize each of you for joining us here today as we commit to action. Since that day in January, SCN's duty desk has identified over 4,200 incidents that had the potential to impact Jewish organizations. We have referred over 360 individuals to federal law enforcement alone. In just the last 24 hours, we identified an individual making threats against the Jewish community. In under 12 hours, he had been identified, law enforcement was tracking him, an arrest warrant was issued, and law enforcement has continued to follow up. In the span of 4 weeks, the shooting in Buffalo, Laguna, Uvalde, and more, a grocery store, church, school, hospital, cemetery, then Highland Park, which touched our community in unique ways. We are living in a complex and dynamic threat environment. As you will hear, we anticipate that these acts of violence are not only likely to continue, but to increase. And so too are the diversity of places where they happen. We're going to discuss the threat environment today, what it means, and what we can do. You will hear from experts on what they are seeing, and then we're going to hear from experts on what we need to be doing. The guidance that is shared today are things that any one of us in our institutions can do. They don't require advanced expertise, complex technology, or deep pockets. We encourage you to take the tips and implement them. At the same time, and as many of you are doing, work to develop that comprehensive strategic plan, both as individuals and in the institutions that you, your families, friends, and loved ones are a part of. We will work together to ensure that these are part of community and regional strategies that help in building the shield we are working to project over the entirety of our community. Make no mistake, we very rarely rise to the occasion. We fall back to our level of training and planning. Planning and preparedness can make a difference. Each of us can make a difference. SCN is honored to work with each of you and your communities in the sacred mission to ensure the safety and security of the Jewish people. We cannot, nor will not, waver in our determination to protect our facilities, our institutions, and our communities and its members, our Jewish life. We cannot, nor will not, allow those who traffic in hate, fear, and violence to overcome our will as a people, or to encourage individuals of any faith to stop going to their houses of worship. We can't choose the time and place the next incident, but we can choose our preparation, and we will. Undeterred, unflinching, unwavering, undefeatable, we will move forward committed to protecting our community, every Jewish life, and those who put theirs in our care. It is now my pleasure to introduce SCN's senior advisor, Carrie Sleeper, who has spent the better part of the last 30 years in law enforcement at the state and federal levels, most recently serving as the assistant director of the FBI. Carrie?
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to offer a couple of thoughts to you before the intelligence brief. I'm becoming increasingly concerned about threat apathy. We hear a lot about this being the most complex and dynamic threat environment this country has seen in modern history. There is concurrence across all levels of the intelligence community, federal, state, and local law enforcement. The threats facing our country are incredibly challenging and likely to get worse. So the accurate statement is the threat environment is becoming more complex and more dynamic every day. But the purpose of a threat brief or intelligence product is not to intimidate you, not to paralyze you with fear or prevent you from doing something. Rather, its purpose is to empower you, enable you to make informed decisions based on available information and intelligence, and allow you to do something you are considering or participating in with relative peace of mind that you are going into a safe environment. In this current threat environment, we all need to be robust consumers of intelligence that keeps us, our families, friends, loved ones, and places of worship safe. You have multiple sources of intelligence available to you to make informed security decisions. Our SEN duty desk identifies and communicates emerging threats to the community, as well as federal, state, and local law enforcement all across this nation several times a day. The talented analysts at the duty desk have the necessary tools and training to uncover threats to our community, often before our federal, state, or local law enforcement partners see them, primarily because they're laser focused on looking for threats to the Jewish community across all accessible websites and platforms. Our state, local, and federal law enforcement partners regularly share tactical and strategic intelligence with our duty desk, who in turn shares it with the community as well. Undoubtedly, your best source of local emerging threat information will be from your local police department, augmented by state fusion centers and FBI joint terrorism task forces. Most of you are likely aware of your best sources of intelligence and threat information for your areas. But if not, if any of you experience challenges in finding a consistent, reliable source to keep you informed, contact me or the duty desk, and we'll make sure to facilitate an introduction to the appropriate entity. Finally, as we talk today, there's an intelligence summit taking place in Washington between federal, state, and local intelligence and law enforcement authorities from across the country, discussing intelligence and information sharing challenges that need to be overcome to mitigate the threats we face as a country and community. It's an acknowledgement that we're all plowing some new ground in this environment. The routine consumption of actionable intelligence to protect your community in this environment is essential. Please read the duty desk alerts and other products you receive in a timely manner. Today's threats literally travel at the speed of the internet. With that, I'd like to introduce David Wilson, the Assistant Deputy Director for Intelligence Operations at the Secure Community Network. David?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Carrie. Good afternoon. As Carrie stated, my name is David Wilson. I am the Assistant Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations here at Secure Community Network. As part of my daily operation, I oversee the intelligence department here at SCN. I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the current threat environment the North American Jewish community is currently facing, starting with a few staggering numbers. As Mr. Masters mentioned, as of August 12th, our duty desk has already recorded more incident reports in 2022 than all of 2021 combined. Further, in just 2022, SCN's duty desk has reported approximately 150 credible threats to the FBI through their National Threat Operations Center. This increase in reporting has been felt most strongly by law enforcement agencies across the nation as they grapple with the need for increased security and safety measures while simultaneously dealing with understaffing and budget shortages across the board. The lack of resources and bandwidth presents a unique opportunity for violent extremists to utilize new tactics. Increasingly, violent extremists are adopting the utilization of social media and online communications to recruit, share their message, and cause discourse. While foreign terrorist organizations have been utilizing these techniques for years, domestic violent extremists have previously been slower to adopt such tactics. This domestic violent extremist push for similar tactics is especially evident with the advent of the Telegram Collective, which, for those of you who are not familiar, is a group of anonymous individuals that subscribe to similar violent extremist ideologies and are known to lead violent extremist channels on a particular platform. It should be noted that while the Telegram Collective generally agrees on most opinions, most, if not all users generally do not adhere to a strict set of ideological principles as has been seen in the past. Instead, the users often subscribe to certain aspects of multiple traditional ideologies. This is often referred to as the salad bar approach, as it makes it much more harder to monitor and track due to the varied approach that is required. To date, the Telegram Collective has released 4 publications with additional future publications announced. These guides are generally on the Great Replacement theory and militant accelerationism to suggest that readers make necessary preparations for inevitable societal collapse. Additionally, these publications provide guidance and encouragement on how to commit acts of violence and disrupt society. This includes, but is not limited to, the use of non-traditional weapons, how to 3D print firearms, bomb-making materials, and calls for attacks against specific communities and individuals. As the Telegram Collective continues to grow in popularity, SCN analysts are inevitably going to locate these threats at an even faster rate. Current technology allows for a hybrid threat environment, making it easier for motivated domestic violent extremists to continually spread their message and incite even more violence. Turning the focus to the high holidays, extremists have long viewed holidays and days of celebration as ideal dates for attacks for a multitude of reasons. These celebrations associated with both religious and secular holidays frequently involve large gatherings in soft targets, such as houses of worship and other crowded venues with limited security, increasing the potential number of targets. An attack on a holiday is also likely to involve increased media coverage, which may be attractive to extremists who are seeking exposure for their message or their cause. Individuals espousing violent extremist and or anti-Semitic ideology have previously carried out attacks against the Jewish community during religious holiday celebrations. As with anti-Semitic incidents in general, a rise in cases reported during the holiday season has been observed in recent years. In 2019 alone, the last year the community was open for the holidays prior to COVID. There were 3 incidents that occurred on a Jewish holiday, resulting in physical harm to the community, 2 of which were fatal. On October 9th, 2018, an individual opened fire at a synagogue in Germany, injuring 2 and killing 2 others on Yom Kippur. The suspect attempted to gain entry to the synagogue before beginning his shooting spree. However, he was unsuccessful in entering the synagogue. He instead turned his focus to a nearby business where he was able to harm multiple individuals. On April 18th, 2019, an individual or group of individuals vandalized a yeshiva in Moscow before setting fire to the building on the first day of Passover. As everyone's familiar with, on April 27, 2019, an individual entered the Chabad of Poway on the last day of Passover and opened fire, killing 1 congregant and injuring 3 others, including the rabbi. On December 27, 2019, an individual walked through Brooklyn and physically assaulted 3 individuals she identified as Jewish based solely on their appearance during Hanukkah. The suspect made several anti-Semitic remarks after at least one of the attacks. And lastly, on December 28, 2019, an individual entered a rabbi's home during a Hanukkah party in Monsey, New York, and began stabbing individuals with a machete. 1 victim unfortunately passed away due to these injuries, and 4 others were wounded. Last year's high holidays offered a host of new security concerns due to the hybrid environment of celebration because of the COVID protocols that were in place. As such, suspicious behavior conveyed either remotely or otherwise not with direct contact accounted for nearly half of all incidents reported to the duty desk during high holidays. This year, with many organizations planning for in-person and or multi-access events and methods of celebration and worship for the high holidays, we are expecting an increase in extremist activity online, as well as the likelihood of potential issues such as vandalism, harassment, and assault, as many facilities open for some of the largest in-person gatherings for the first time since March of 2019. That concludes my briefing. Thank you very much. I am now going to turn back over to Carrie.
Thank you, David, for the comprehensive threat brief. I'll also reference that I've seen a number of questions already regarding specific inquiries between law enforcement agencies and specific synagogues. We'll get back to you on those questions just as quickly as we can. Also, there's a number of inquiries regarding access to the duty desk, and I know David will follow up on that shortly as well. With that, I would like to turn it over to Brad Orsini, SCN Senior National Security Advisor. Brad?
Carrie, thank you very much. Welcome everybody to our kickoff season of our first high holiday security webinar. Carrie started out with talking about apathy, and I think that is a great way to start. 7 years ago, when I looked at Jewish communal security, one of the things that never concerned me was high holidays for the following reason. Our community has always traditionally been great at securing their facilities during high holidays. I think since Charlottesville, since Pittsburgh, and then the onslaught of 4 attacks in less than 14 months, the rest of the community really is more focused on security. And I really concur with Carrie talking about the threats that are out there. Looking at them every day can make us numb to them. What we are really trying to accomplish today is we did listen to all our synagogue movements, our security directors, and we're really front loading our webinar series starting today with all our resources. And one of the things we really wanted to do is pick the top 15 resources that I will go through with you, and then we'll really dive down on most of them today. However, we're still giving you the resources that we're going to use for September 8th outdoor and non-traditional special events. But we're going to give you that written guidance today so you can prepare. Personal safety webinar, all the items that we think can help effectuate a good, solid security plan for the high holidays. We're giving them to you today. And then we're going to really start with a panel of our 4 regional directors who I'll introduce here in a few minutes. To answer a lot of questions that I saw already in the chat room, yes, this webinar will be recorded. 2, you will see a QR code on each slide moving forward. That will get you right into the resources after this webinar. And you can also sign up for the continued webinar series in that one link that we're going to provide you here in a minute. But I want to just really move towards our high holiday resources. And it really starts with that security planning checklist and what that looks like for our communities. We talk all the time in our training sessions. Have a plan, reduce that plan to writing, practice that plan, share that plan with law enforcement. That is exactly what this checklist is today. And we're really going to dive into the checklist with our group of regional directors here at the end. And we're really going to get to most of your questions. At the conclusion of this webinar, we will really go through all the questions. We have over 1,000 people on this webinar right now and a lot of questions coming in. We will get to your questions. We will review them and get back to you. But I think if you stay with us throughout this webinar and our entire webinar series, we're going to give you a clear framework on how to build a good, holistic, layered approach to the high holidays this year. And it starts with this resource, number 1, that high holiday checklist. And on the back page of this guidance is a checklist that just goes through every item that you should be thinking about when planning for your high holidays security series. Next, we talk about this all the time, the threat, vulnerability, and risk assessments. We drill this home during NSGP season, right? We've all are familiar with the threat and vulnerability risk assessment. We have this handy dandy tool that's a fill in the blank self-assessment that every one of our organizations can do. We talk about this throughout our NSGP season and now for high holidays. It's really important for the attendees on this call today to understand that this threat and vulnerability risk assessment tool and that assessment really drives how we change our security posture in each and every organization. It helps us fill those gaps and vulnerabilities and what we are looking to do to keep everybody safe. I encourage you all to download this item and go through it, compare it to your last threat and vulnerability assessment. Make sure you're hitting all the items to really keep you as safe as possible. Our next resource that we just put this out a few months ago is how do you form a security committee? We talk about our safety and security committees all the time, what the importance of that. We're going to address this a little more in detail on our panel discussion today, but it really starts with those key leaders, those operational, organizational staff members in our organizations, whether our schools, our JCCs, any one of our communal assets. We want to make sure each organization has that safety and security committee. We also want to get buy-in from our key stakeholders, our volunteers, our ushers, our greeters that really comprise this committee to drive what we need as a local organization on the ground level. Please take a look at that security committee and see if you're hitting all the questions that you should be answering in one of your security committee meetings. This is really a great time. We have a little over 6 weeks until the high holidays, a little less than 6 weeks, and we want to make sure you take a look at this, forming that security committee. The next item that we are having available is that low cost, no cost security measure. This guide, we talk about this one a lot. It gives us those top 10, 12 items to make sure we do. We are a community just like any other community. We have some of our schools that have all the bells and whistles and all the security measures, that target hardening measures that we can purchase through NSGP grants or through our actual security budget. Conversely, we also have a lot of our organizations that are fiscally constrained. Please take a look at this low cost, no cost measure and implement a lot of these basic items to keep our synagogues as secure as we can. And also, Michael talked about this at the very beginning, that importance of reporting. What's our threat mitigation system if we hear something, we see something, right? We say, see something, say something. We take that one step further, do something. Report that suspicious activity. We're going to really talk about how the Jewish community and security is laid out across the country. We're going to introduce you to our 4 regional security directors that really blanket our country right now, and that you can go to those folks if you don't have dedicated security resources in your federation or in your community. But please take advantage of these items we're passing out today. The House of Worship Security Pocket Guide. This is a great tool for all our organizations. It's printable, put it at our reception desk. These are things our safety and security committee should always be looking at. You know, we're more prone to find or have a lost child or a medical emergency than we are with that active threat or active shooter, but we got to prepare at all levels. And this pocket guide really is just a thumbnail of everything we should be looking at the same time. And we could pass this out to all our organizational stakeholders, our ushers and our greeters and our volunteer groups to help them really plan. You're going to hear a lot with our panel about communication and talking and engaging first responders. And when I say first responders, I mean more than law enforcement. I mean our EMS personnel, our fire personnel. We talk all the time on engaging law enforcement. This, folks, is absolutely no cost to you, and why it's so important. And what we did for the community is put this great 6-page guide together of how you should work and how you should think about working with law enforcement at different level, whether it's the local level on up to the federal level. What's a fusion center? What's an intelligence center? What should you be garnering from our law enforcement and our first responding professionals out there? We want to make sure we give you that guide to really get as much as we can. Law enforcement is great. And the more engagement we have with them, the more resources we are going to get and the more they're going to pay attention to us. Law enforcement, by and large, always is there for the community, and they are that first response in times of incidents. But I don't want to forget our firefighters and our EMS professionals as well. And this really is a great guide for the community. Next, I encourage every temple administrator, every organizational leader on this phone to download the Introduction to Judaism for Law Enforcement and Security Professionals. This is an incredible guide that we just put out in June of this year to give to our law enforcement professionals. I would provide this at the highest levels in our PD, their training facilities. It is a great guide that we provide to law enforcement at every level, and it really explains the Jewish community as it relates to security. What do the high holidays look like? What are the different denominations in Judaism? Everything they need to know to really support a good community effect for law enforcement. So this tool alone for our temple administrators is really great as a guide to provide to law enforcement as they're engaging them. Law enforcement is really going to appreciate this tool. We at SCN spend a lot of time still with a lot of members of our group actually training law enforcement. We provide this hardcover guide to all our law enforcement officials that we train. I encourage you to do the same. Next week on August 25th, we are going to talk about firearms and the faithful. We've had many webinars about what does that look like, firearms in our synagogues to use to protect our community. The same with hiring that private security. So we're going to take our 2 position papers that we've produced over the last couple of years and have a great panel next week with some law enforcement officials still on duty out there protecting us, and with our group of security professionals in the Jewish community to really dive deep down on how we're going to lay out that security, that armed presence in each one of our shuls during the high holidays. So I encourage you all to get a deeper dive into that next week as we move on with our webinar series. If you've never read these, we're making them available to you now, and please take a look at them before next week. And I think it can really inform your opinions with your safety and security committees when you're making decisions whether to arm or not arm with professionals in support of the high holidays. On September 8th, we're really going to dive down into that outdoor services. What does that look like for our community? Special events. We do a lot of programming outside. Our high holidays in most areas of the United States is still nice weather, and we have a lot of programming outside. We're going to bring together a group of experts on September 8th during that webinar to really go down what it takes to secure an outdoor event, a special event. I encourage you all, again, you have the access to this now. Take a look at it when you're working with your law enforcement officials and you're planning an outdoor service or an outdoor reception after services to really hone down on that security perimeter and different items that are different outside than securing inside the building. We also provided during election season over the last couple of years, civil unrest, facility preparedness. This guide will also be available as we're coming up on the midterm elections in November, as we unfortunately see sometimes the temperature in our country rising with the civil unrest. We also have this great guide for facility preparedness if we see any of these incidents that are really coming to a head and that we need to secure our facilities in case of civil unrest. And then on September 15th, we're going to turn to that safety for individuals, personal safety for our leaders. What does it look like? And so we have a series of documents that we are going to be talking about in detail on September 15th, on personal safety, to include the low cost, no cost safety and security measures for individuals and families. What we should think about at our home. We even built in a home safety plan template that we wanted to provide everybody again today with helpful tips on how do I keep my family, myself safe. Our leaders in our community should look at that. A lot of our folks in the community are very visible and potentially targets of somebody that means harm to the Jewish community. So please tune in for that 9:15 webinar on personal safety, and we will have all these items available for you. And finally, that 15th item is we talk all the time about de-escalation. And it really starts with that greeting at our doorstep, that power of hello. We didn't create anything different for our community. Homeland Security did a great guide for houses of worship on the power of hello. And that's really what it starts out with. You know, we all board planes. What's the first thing you see when that flight attendant, what are they doing? They're greeting you right at the beginning. Why are they greeting you? Well, one, it's their job to be friendly, but they greet you to engage you, to assess you, to look at just that simple hello, how are you today, on maybe to identify some kind of anomaly or threat that our ushers and our greeters can then turn over to law enforcement or our armed security professionals there helping us keep us safe. Those are our top 15. What you haven't seen on the top 15 list is all our cyber resources. We have those available as well. We have an additional 5 cyber resources that really talk about how to keep your online services as secure as possible, what we should do with our website. So we do have all that guidance. I don't want anybody out there forgetting how important cybersecurity is for our community as well. So let's concentrate on that, download those as well. But we wanted to really focus on those tangible things that we could see, feel, and touch as we have our mass gatherings coming in and out of our organizations. What I'd like to do now is right before we bring up our esteemed panel of regional directors today, kind of give you a idea and a picture of how we are broken out at SCN and how we cover security for the entirety of the United States. And keep in mind, our friends from Canada who we work with as well, we are there for you all. I know we have some folks on the line from Canada today. These resources are pertinent to you as they are for our folks down here in the United States. But how we've broken up the country is in 4 distinct regions. The Northwest region, and we have a regional director, Gene Moss, who I'll introduce in a second, who covers all those states you see in yellow. In blue, Northeast Regional, Steve Eberly, who you've seen a lot of our regional directors on our webinars in the past. He handles everything in the Northeast. Southeast is Mark Kennord, who's the regional director down there. And in our Southwest is Dave Humble, who handles everything in the Southwest. And with that, I'd like to invite all our regional directors to come on the screen now so we can really get into depth and get into our questions. If you can all really just come on aboard here. And what I'd like to do, starting with Gene, moving to Steve, then Mark, then Dave, please spend a minute introducing yourself. And for everybody's benefit on this call, you're going to see really the strength of our network, starting with our regional directors and what they've done in their prior lives in law enforcement. And that is why they are with us right now and working to protect these vast amounts of territory they have. With that, I'll turn it over to Gene Moss in the Northwest. Gene?
Thank you, Brad. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My background is, like many of my colleagues, 30 years in law enforcement at a local level. I was with the sheriff's office in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, and retired from that organization. Was also a police chief with a small municipality in that same county. And I started out my career with SCN a little over 3 years ago, and I actually began as a regional security advisor where we had the Portland metropolitan area as an upstart program and covered Portland and Oregon. Thank you.
Steve?
Thank you, Brad. As Brad said, I'm Steve Eberly. I'm the Northeast Regional Director. Prior to joining SCN, I spent nearly 26 years with the Pennsylvania State Police. Throughout my career, I did every assignment from barracks commander, troop commander, internal affairs commander, special operations director, and then ending at area commander. After retiring from the Pennsylvania State Police, I joined SCN, and I've been here for about 18 months now. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Steve. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to be here. My name is Mark Kenord. I'm the Southeast Regional Director, and I joined SCN about 6 months ago. I retired from the U.S. Department of State after almost about 30 years, DOD prior to that. I spent about half my career with the State Department overseas and about half domestic as a federal law enforcement officer with the Diplomatic Security Service.
And last but certainly not least, Dave Humble.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for having me and welcome everyone. My name is David Humble. I've been with Secure Community Network for about 8 months. In my previous career, I spent over 30 years with the Tempe Police Department in Tempe, Arizona. For those of you who don't know that area, it's a suburb of Phoenix in Scottsdale, Arizona. I, like Steve, held a lot of ranks in the Tempe Police Department to include criminal investigations, threat mitigation unit, and patrol, traffic, everything you can do at a police department. I did it. So just thanks for having us. Thanks for spending some time with us, and we appreciate your attendance. Thanks, Brad.
David, thank you. And for everybody on the call today, I want you to keep in mind your first line of defense always is 911 in any emergency. If you have a Jewish communal security professional in your city, utilize him or her. If you don't know if you have a Jewish security professional, these are the 4 folks that you should be reaching out to, and they can either A, tie you into a security director, or B, if you do not have one, they are there to support you. And so at the end of this call, I hope their phones and their emails are ringing off the hook, and I hope their inboxes are full of requests from the community, because that is what they are there for. They are there for everybody on this call. So Gene, let me start with you. We just heard from David and Carrie on the national threat we face. Can you please discuss how important it is to understand the local threat and the trends that may occur in the local area? And what advice can you give the attendees to identify that threat with their local law enforcement officials?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Great question. So it's really important, obviously, that our community members, do have an awareness and understanding of their local threat landscape. That really just helps them with their awareness and vigilance about those crime trends and livability challenges, and that is really the source is going to be their local law enforcement. There are great resources that come from our federal partners, the FBI, DHS, other federal law enforcement entities. But to really drill down into crime trends, especially local hate crimes that may be occurring, and livability challenges, that's going to really be on that local law enforcement. Another, as it was brought up by David with our SCN duty desk, another great piece of information that folks have available to them is to sign up for our daily bulletins through the SCN duty desk, where that provides both local and national trends that may be helpful and informative for our community members. And then, you brought it up a little earlier, Brad, and you can't say it enough about the high holiday checklist. There's so much great information within that document that our community members can glean and use to their advantage. So I highly recommend that. From with that checklist, it has that liaisoning with law enforcement, the safety, security, committees, and then also the safety plans that may be in place or should be in place for high holidays, as well as other events, just throughout the year. With the law enforcement specifically, it's really imperative that our community organizations have that relationship with public safety. And I say public safety because, as you put it, it does transcend law enforcement. We want our fire and our EMS services to be aware of our organizations, our facilities, know that our high holy days are forthcoming and that we have events planned and what those events are going to be, scheduling, etc. The relationships also with our public safety partners, our law enforcement especially, it's important that they do receive those security plans from our synagogues when we're going to have our services, and that they have points of contact, right? That's so very important. Who do they get a hold of if they have questions about a safety plan or an event, or there's, a emergency and they need to make emergency notification. The other thing about our law enforcement is, reach out to them well in advance. So we know our high holy days are forthcoming. Now would be a great time if our community organizations haven't already, to reach out to those law enforcement partners and, request them for fulfilling security service needs, right? If that's what the synagogue or the organization wants to utilize, which is of course a recommendation, best practice recommendation by us, right? Use law enforcement off duty. Then secondly would be perhaps that professional armed security service, but provide that law enforcement, those law enforcement officers, contact them, provide your schedule, try and get them scheduled in advance, because their time's fleeting and it will get eaten up by other opportunities they're going to be facing. And the other thing too, before I pass the mic, is don't forget, like you said, Brad, we are a resource. If a community doesn't have a professional security director that they can lean on, please contact us. We can help you. If you don't have those relationships established with your law enforcement partners, we can help reach out on your behalf. So don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Gene, thank you. Steve, talk to me a little bit about why a safety and security committee is so important, and why each one of our congregations or organizations on the call today need to have one.
Thank you, Brad. Great question. First off, a security committee is a key component for creating effective strategic security planning for facilities and organizations. Secondly, our security committee members should be reviewing our security plans and procedures to ensure that we have everything in place prior to the high holidays. They should be meeting with our local law enforcement partners and providing them with a calendar of events and services. They should be requesting increased patrols, and they should be asking the officers to do walkthroughs of our facilities prior to our high holiday activities. They should be ensuring that our safety devices and equipment have been tested and are functional. Some examples of these include like our locks, our security cameras, our lighting systems, our alarm systems, walkie-talkies, AEDs, and so on. They should be establishing an effective method of communication to share suspicious activity or areas of concerns throughout the community. Additionally, the security committee should play a part in ensuring that our clergy, our staff, our lay leaders know what their key role is and essentially what they should be doing in an emergency situation. And lastly, our security committee should be meeting after our first large event or service to see if any security procedural changes are needed. They should be evaluating essentially what worked, what was effective, and essentially what wasn't. We need to remember that security is not a one-size-fits-all, right? It's what works for one synagogue or one community organization may not work for another. And then I'll just wrap up by referring, you talked earlier when you were reviewing through the documents, that document that SCN has forming a security committee is an excellent document and would be very helpful for those organizations that are looking to form a security committee or even revamping their current security committee.
Steve, thank you very much. And I think one really great takeaway too from that point is this should be the time every one of our safety and security committees are testing the alarm systems, making sure the cameras are working, and everything we need to do with the technology we already have. So thank you very much. And Mark, kind of turning towards the security committee, once that's formed, talk to me about why it's so important. And I spent a little time talking about our threat and vulnerability assessment tool, but why that's so important to do right now and why everybody should be pulling us off the shelf or revamping or encouraging our folks to do it again through a self-assessment. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure, Brad, thanks. That's a great question. And thanks for the earlier lead-in and your earlier remarks on the importance of using that available tool to self-assess facilities. You know, these TVRAs, or these threat and vulnerability risk assessments, or the facility self-assessment tool, is a foundational document. It's a foundational aspect of putting together a comprehensive security plan or mitigation strategy. Because these tools, these assessments, drive security posture. They help us identify the risks. They help identify where the priorities for those risks and the mitigation strategy to follow should be assigned. They go well beyond being simply a tool to apply for an NSGP grant application. They are instrumental in a security program in helping us to assess and identify those priorities. A couple of questions that should probably accompany using the tool and the assessment. First off, do you have them? Have they been completed? Are they up to date? You know, they're on a 3-year cycle, but they can be updated more frequently than that because things change. You know, facilities change, threat environments change, all sorts of things change. And so it's important not only to have these, but to ensure that they are properly updated on a regular basis or as required. Are all of your stakeholders who are involved in community security, are they aware of the TVRA or the facility assessment tool and what its applications are, what its uses are, and what its limitations are, what it is supposed to do for you? And are they taking advantage of that information or that capability? Does the TVRA or does the facility tool assess procedural security things as well as technical and physical systems? Sometimes we tend to think that security, you know, is largely around security, physical and technical features. You know, it's important to understand that the procedural aspect, which can be included in the assessment, is equally or of greater importance. It doesn't do any good to have the strongest door with the greatest locks in the world if that door is left propped open for people to come in. And we can go, you know, down the procedural lane as far as anyone would like to go. But the bottom line is the procedural aspects of security are of equal or greater merit and importance sometimes than the physical and technical aspects. So again, it's important to keep these assessments, one, to make sure that they're accomplished, two, that there's community buy-in, that they are properly used and properly understood, because things do change. And they do provide that, again, foundational framework because they are purpose-driven documents. They lead us to solutions for a safer and more secure community. And I just reference, you know, item number 2 on the 15 documents that Brad provided an overview, and also item number 4. I highly encourage you to download these documents and employ them.
Mark, thank you very much. David, this next question, we could probably spend the rest of the webinar on this, but many of our organizations, as we talked about, are fiscally constrained on how much money they have for security. Really, we're really trying to teach our community that security should no longer be a luxury, but a line item budget. However, for those folks that don't have that much money, can you discuss some basic low cost, no cost security procedures the attendees can deploy today?
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And you're spot on with that. The budget resources are different for every community. So I'm going to hit some points here quick, and then we can talk about a little bit more with through the document. First and foremost, secure your property. And I know that's a broad statement, but does your property have very visible perimeter property lines? Do people know through proper signage that they're actually on your property? I know for some locations that's not as easy as others, if you have fencing or not, but that's a good start. Are your trees and shrubbery overgrown to where it blocks camera systems and lightings? You know, have your maintenance people, and that might be one person who does everything at some of your communities, but keep your plants and shrubbery trimmed as best as you can. And coming up to the events and services next month, if you have a fenced event, or if you have an event, walk the event before it starts. See if there's any gaps in the fence line. See if there's people hanging around the fence line that are just kind of suspicious. And then do it after the event. I know that kind of sounds kind of strange because, we're really focusing on when people are there, but people forget to look at the perimeters before the event and after. Have proper signage. We've talked about that. As people come onto your property, do they know where to park? Do you have people helping guiding them parking? Do they know where to walk through the parking lot to your facility? A lot of accidents happen in parking lots, and it can be avoided if you have a good traffic flow and a good traffic plan. Have good signage. Do you know, we're going to talk a little bit later about some firearm considerations, but do you have good, proper signage if you have a firearms policy? Is it posted at your entrance? Does it have the right state or local laws associated in the signage? Also about bag searches. If you're going to do bag searches, if you're going to consider that, do you have the right signage? All of that, very easy. Signs are pretty cheap, but it's very important to do that. Secure your facility. I think Mark mentioned, if you have a lock and it's great, but if it doesn't work, not very good. Do your exit doors, do they stay locked and can they not be opened from the outside or propped open? It's really frustrating, I think, for everyone when you have a great security system and it's just diverted by leaving a door propped open. Brad, you talked about, hey, it's a great time, check those alarm systems, your camera systems, do it now. You still have time to get it fixed. We have about 30 days or so leading up to the holidays. So, do it this week, next week, ensure those security systems are in good working order before the events. Liaison with your local law enforcement. If you have not invited your local PD, fire, EMS, have them over. I'll tell you, cops and firefighters love food. So if you want to give them a hot coffee, some food, invite them over. It's always better to meet your local cops and firefighters before the critical incident. Start a relationship with them. It's vitally important. Probably one of the most important low-cost free things you can do. Get to know your cops and firefighters. Medical supplies. Do a medical supply check. Stop the bleed kits. We can talk about those later or during a different seminar or webinar, but your AED, is your staff trained in AED training? And do you have basic first aid supplies in the facility? Make sure your lighting is up to snuff. A lot of, I've been on several properties where they have lighting all over the place, but it's covered by trees. So it's not doing any good. So great lighting systems, but it doesn't work. So, and if you have dark spots around dumpsters behind your facility, let's light them up. Bad guys don't like lights. So let's light up your property. Access control, Steve talked a little bit about that. Ensure you have visitor check-in procedures, especially for all these events. Most likely you're going to have a lot of people at your facilities in the coming months. And hopefully you have a registration system and you want to place security near those locations. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Last but not least, I know I hit a lot of points, but please, as Brad did the QR code, we'll supply these later as well. Our low cost, no cost document is very beneficial and helpful. We're going through a lot today, but please download those documents so you have more time to review them. Thanks, Brad.
David, thank you very much. Gene, David just talked about low cost, no cost measures. You talked a little bit about the importance of engaging law enforcement. I'd like you really just to stress that point again, because one, that's the free item that we can do. And why is it so important to engage law enforcement right now?
Yeah, so again, it is so very important that we get ahead of that curve, that scheduling curve, and engage law enforcement, especially if we're going to be utilizing them as our primary means of armed security during our high holy day service. Law enforcement, whether it's west, east, north, south, are struggling with their staffing. So the sooner we can get in touch with our law enforcement partners to get them scheduled, the better off we're going to be. The other thing that's really important is, the other law enforcement resources that are available that are no cost. You can reach out to your local police department, sheriff's office, perhaps even your state patrol, depending on your jurisdiction, and request crime prevention specialists to come out, Brad, and they can come out and, go through a operations plan or a security plan for a high holy day event or service. They can do that walkthrough like David alluded to, and that no cost, low cost. They can go through with pen and paper and take some pictures and look at those trees that were already mentioned and make suggestions on trimming back branches to help the light do its job, things like that. So you can also reach out to not just the crime prevention within law enforcement, but think about that again, that shift supervisor, that district patrol officer, right? The one that's patrolling by the shul likely every day. Let's reach out to them, get them invited. It saddens me that David didn't bring up the key thing that gets the cops in, right? The all-powerful donut, with sprinkles. That's the best one. So, again, it's that relationship. They're going to, be able to provide also those, synagogue leaders, the staff members, those safety security folks. They're going to give them the local trends also, Brad, getting back to that, right? So you have those conversations with crime prevention, with the local district patrol officer, and you just have some good conversation. The other thing is we have lots of time, like it's been alluded to. Perhaps you reach out to local law enforcement and say, hey, how would you like to come out and do some training, right, at our synagogue? How would you like to go through, have your tactical team come out, don't break anything, but do some training, right? Practice some drills. Maybe you have your local law enforcement bring out their traffic safety team and they're doing a seat belt or a child car seat event in your parking lot. It's just making that connectivity. The other thing that's really important with that law enforcement, especially reaching out to them in advance of our high holy days, is providing them that important security plan, letting them know police, fire, medical, where are the go bags, right? Where are all the, information on the products that, like pass keys, etc., mapping of the interior floor plans that they may need to rely on in that time of crisis. And it doesn't have to necessarily be nefarious intent. It could be a medical emergency, right? So, how are they going to get in there and help? And then lastly, the points of contact are so very important too. Please make sure we're getting that points of contact with our law enforcement partners. You can certainly give it to SCM. We would appreciate that as well if we don't already have it, just in case there's that emergency and we need to make contact. All of that, Brad, will also help with those response times. So, much like we have in our law enforcement guide, and you brought it up, the new guide, law enforcement guide for Judaism is amazing. I wish I would have had that when I was in law enforcement, because it really provides those law enforcement partners with the why we do certain customs on our high holy days. It just helps them to answer some of that and really inform them. So please, folks, we highly encourage you to provide those documents to your law enforcement partners. It's just going to make life easier on everybody.
Gene, great. And I just like to summarize just a couple points you made, because I think it's very important, especially we have a couple chiefs in our RD cadre. I think it's very important for the audience to understand that law enforcement, by and large, throughout the country is understaffed right now, and they're having difficulty getting officers to join the police force. It is a tough time to be a law enforcement official. So where you can get a law enforcement off-duty officer 3-4 years ago might be harder today. I want everybody to keep that point in mind. Second point is, when we're dealing with law enforcement, and Gene talked about this, we need our organizations to give the schedule of their services to law enforcement right now. We need to identify where our community is going to be, what time they're going to be there. Are they going to be indoors or outdoors, especially with our Orthodox community walking to and from the shul. And then third, that great importance of working with law enforcement, and folks do this. if you have great relationships with law enforcement, sometimes the best deterrent is having that police vehicle that may no longer be in service, that we're going to say, hey, can you tow your patrol car over that's not working and plant it right in front of our synagogue for services, even though there might not be a patrol car in there. We do that in a lot of our cities, and a lot of our police departments have excess cars that we might be able to utilize. That is all dependent on what Gene and Steve and everybody else has talked about, the great engagement with law enforcement. So thank you, Gene. Steve, turning something a little different now. We talked about one of the most fundamental bases of security is access control. The second fundamental basis of security is access control. And what's the third one? Access control. It's all about who we're letting in and out of the building. Can you really talk about the major tenets of access control, and what should everybody be following when we talk about access control?
Sure. Thanks, Brad. So I believe this was already said, and I know it goes without saying, but I'm going to address it again. We do not want to prop our doors open. We do not want to leave them unsecured, and we do not want to leave them unsupervised, right? It's critically important that we control and limit our access points. Once we've determined where our access point is going to be, we can utilize signs or people to funnel the flow of foot traffic into our selected entrance point. Right. And also, this should eliminate people from wandering around our facilities. We should have our ushers and greeters meeting people as they are entering the facility and not after they are already inside the facility. If we're expecting a large turnout, right, we want to have, or we can have a pre-registration and utilize tickets to control who we are permitting inside the facility. And lastly, really, it's important to remember that we want to manage the expectations of attendance. For example, maybe advise the congregation that they should arrive a little early and let them know what the security protocols are going to look like for the high holidays. We could have our clergy make announcements in the weeks leading up to the high holidays, just so that everybody understands what the expectations are. And then lastly, Brad, I know you talked on it earlier, and I'm just going to address again, the high holiday checklist that you mentioned really covers a lot of this, even in so much more detail, and it's really helpful in a useful document.
And Steve, thank you very much. And I think you said it in your statement. It's all about keeping the threat outside. So not only checking our folks in outside, then letting them in the building. It's also when they're bringing the bag of food for the food pantry, making sure that we don't let them in the door and then come back in and check in, to have all those checkpoints the best we can outside. So thank you very much. Mark, we really talked through the threat briefing about the importance to see something, say something for our community. When and who should support, or when and who should report suspicious activity? And how does that look for a congregation?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I think Mr. Masters, Mr. Sleeper, and yourself mentioned see something, say something, do something in your remarks. So in my estimation, that's an important point to make. If you see something, say something, do something. Broadly, reporting suspicious activity, it sounds like it's a simple concept, right? You know, we see something that's unusual, suspicious, or out of place, report it. But the sad reality is that a great deal of reportable suspicious activity goes unreported. Why is that? It's either unnoticed, you know, with the prevalent use of technology and personal distraction devices, you know, phones and so forth. Many people simply walk around unaware. They don't see the suspicious, unusual, or suspicious activity that goes on around them. And so it goes unreported. Some see it, but they dismiss it, because their definition of what constitutes suspicious is different, and their threshold may be very high for what would be considered a reportable thing. Or finally, sometimes people just don't want to get involved. They see something, maybe it meets their threshold for suspicious, but they move on. So there's a multitude of reasons why suspicious activity doesn't get reported all the time. See something, say something, do something. SCN put out a security bulletin yesterday, and it says, in part, individuals and organizations are encouraged to report any suspicious activity to law enforcement and to the SCN duty desk. Leadership and security personnel are also encouraged to remain situationally aware and to proactively implement facility and security best practices that effectively address different areas of vulnerability and method of attack. It goes on to say, follow established protocols to report suspicious activity, to include contacting local law enforcement and or the relevant suspicious activity reporting authority, and contact the SCN duty desk. So your key takeaways here are, number one, first and foremost, awareness is essential. Be aware. That's how you identify what is suspicious, by understanding and observing and identifying what it is and when it occurs. Security is everyone's responsibility. Everyone is a sensor, and that needs to be communicated. It's not my role, it's not my responsibility doesn't work anymore. If you are a member of the community, you are a sensor, you are a potential witness. You need to be alert and to be able to identify, assess, and report suspicious, unusual, or out of place activity or behavior. We need to develop a sense of what exactly suspicious behavior or activity is, or suspicious device or vehicle. Understanding where the thresholds are to report things, where and when. Should I report one incident or one activity in one place, but not necessarily in another because it doesn't fit over here, or it does fit over here? If I'm in the parking lot of my facility and I see a car entering the parking lot at 30 miles an hour, that's a little different than if I see that same car going 30 miles an hour down the street. So context provides some assistance in developing that understanding of what to identify as suspicious, unusual, or out of place. Using technology. We talked a little bit about physical and technical security earlier, and I'll zero in on CCTV or closed circuit television cameras. These are considered a great tool for observing things, providing offset. Most of our facilities have at least some type of camera system, but is the camera system monitored? Because if it's not monitored, all it does is record things for review later. That doesn't help us be proactive. It doesn't support a response left of bang before something happens. All it does is record the event as it's occurring. So we need to understand both the capabilities of technology and the limitations of technology, and how procedures, having someone monitor that camera bank or that multiplexer system, is as important as having the system itself. Consider your perspective. Does something make sense to you when you're out and about? What level of awareness are you walking around in? You know, we have an example that we use in our Be Aware training of Cooper's colors, and not to go into that, but it's basically a spectrum of personal awareness, starting with condition white, condition yellow, slightly higher sense of awareness, condition orange, more vigilance, condition red, and then ultimately condition black, or what we call a valley of shock, where you are caused to go into an inaction mode. So consider your perspective and the perspective of an adversary, because if you are being looked at, you need to understand what they are looking for in terms of assessing you as a target. You want to present yourself as a hard target, because perception, as we know, is 9/10 of reality. And many times, if we present ourselves as a hard target, or our facility as a hard target, they will go somewhere else. Thanks, Brad.
Mark, thank you very much. And just to summarize, and just to be crystal clear with our attendees, we talk a lot about communication with law enforcement and reporting. Keep in mind, as we're developing those law enforcement relationships, our community police officer, when you see something, you say something, you don't report it to that community police officer. If it's an emergence, you report it to 911. So I don't want our community to get in the habit to report it to our community police officer, who may not be on duty, may not be available. First thing. Second is, a lot of our community uses WhatsApp reporting for reporting suspicious behavior. If it's not going to law enforcement, we can't mitigate it. So I think those are a few very good points that we all need to keep in mind. David, we're getting down to our time, and we have a few questions left. We're going to go through the lightning round of questions, with maybe about 4 questions left. Next week, we're going to really talk about firearms in the faithful and deploying a armed presence. But for the purpose of this first webinar, can you just really discuss the methodology used to determine if you need armed security during the high holiday services and events? And depending on the number of armed resources, where and how would you deploy them?
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, and good point. We're going to talk a lot about this next week, so I'll keep it brief today. Our armed security, every meeting I've been in, this topic has come up. It's a difficult topic, but it needs to be discussed in your community. Each individual community needs to make their own decision regarding firearms on their location. You need to consider your legal advisor. Is your community, what's the comfort level of your community and your congregation? Do you have a security committee? Do you, your stakeholders, your key decision makers, your lay leaders, your rabbis, what are their thoughts when it comes to firearms? So first of all, you need to have those discussions before you take action. So it's always good. Let's talk about the issue. Let's come up with options, and then let's do something. If you do decide to have armed security, what are your options? We're gonna talk about that a lot more next week. What your options are, pros and cons to each option. But if you do, where do you want to put them? I would recommend, as Brad asked, if you have the resources, hire off-duty law enforcement, local law enforcement officers. They're trained, they know the area. Hopefully they know what your facility looks like. And if you can get the same officers to work all your events, that's even better. But sign them up early, as Gene talked about. Access control. If you have the resources, have an officer near the front of your facility. As Steve talked about, if we have a conflict or a disturbance, that officer hopefully can manage that outside the facility. If you have a second officer available, have them walk the perimeter, have them walk the parking lot. They may see someone suspicious. They're trained to look for that before that person maybe even gets out of their car. So those are some advantages. We'll talk about plainclothes options and other options next week, but those are the places I would put them. Some last second considerations. What are the training? What's the training required if you don't use law enforcement, if you use armed security? Are they certified? What are the permit laws in your state and your city? A lot of considerations when it comes to firearms. We have a couple of great white papers, Firearms and Faithful and Private Security white papers that we'll talk about next week. But big topic. That's why we're dedicating a whole webinar to talk about it. And we'll talk more about it next week. Thanks, Brad.
David, thank you for a great preview for next week. Gene, during the high holidays, we traditionally see our congregations filled to capacity with the potential of long lines and increased security. What advice can you provide the attendees on the importance of messaging out to the congregation prior to the high holidays on additional security measures?
Yeah, very timely question, Brad. It's so very important that this, synagogues are that leadership is meshing out to congregants what those protocols are. We want to be mindful. We're not going to give away the keys for those that may want to do our organizations harm, but we still can message smartly to our congregants that there's a registration process, and that registration process may include ticketing or the presentation of ID upon arrival. There may be stations, right, for checking bags, for dropping off foodstuffs if that's being brought, and these should be communicated. It just helps lower the temperature for all of our congregants that are attending. To your point, in shuls that we hope are full. So it's really important that we get that information out early. And then for those that are going to be attending, exercise patience, just arrive early, anticipate that, there may be challenges with parking, or, there may be additional challenges with approaching if you're approaching on foot. So just having that patience and then exercising that good situational awareness of your surroundings. So,
And Gene, can a follow-up question to that? Because I think it's really important
Absolutely.
for the attendees to understand what our rationale and thinking is. A lot of our schools use a ticketing process.
Mhm.
Do you have a ticket or do you not? Also, during the high holidays, a lot of our communities do great messaging out to our Hillels on campus. A lot of college kids are from out of town, so they're very unfamiliar faces to a particular school. What's your advice on registration, ticketing, and how we may streamline that process or vet people we may not know coming into the facility?
Right. No, great follow-up, Brad. So, as we have hopefully visitors that are in attendance at our schools for the High Holy Days, we can put in that messaging to our congregants in our community, both perhaps electronically and also with signage, right? It's been brought up before about the leveraging signage. So if you have a registration station, perhaps we have signage there that identification needs to be presented in the form of a state identification, right? A driver's license or a passport or college ID, our Hillels, right? They have a college ID from the university they're attending, or perhaps it's even, if it's not a Hillel member, maybe it's a high school ID, some sort of identification. There could be also organizations, Brad, that have, distribute to their congregants perhaps a identification card, much like JCCs might provide you with a membership card. Perhaps they have that, and that would be a very acceptable form for getting through that registration process. We all know that tickets, which are great, that's a great process for registration. However, sometimes the control measures on those can be challenging. So just having that communication, Brad, on the front end from our our staff members within the synagogue and or coupled with signage can just help reduce anxiety.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Steve, we got a few moments left, and I think we just got a couple more questions we want to answer. You already talked about layered approach to security. You talked about access control. Can you talk to the attendees a little bit about the perimeter and parking lots adjacent to the building? What extra measures do we need to deploy during the high holidays because of the amount of people for safety and security?
Yep. Thanks, Brad. Yeah, right. We talk all the time about limiting control and access to our facilities, but it's equally as important that we control what's occurring on our perimeter, right? So if we have the surveillance camera equipment, right, we should have a member of our congregation there actively monitoring those surveillance cameras, looking for any type of suspicious activity occurring on our property. We could have our volunteers outside directing the flow of traffic and assisting with parking. We could utilize physical barriers as well, or traffic cones or signs to assist with the controlling of the flow of traffic. But it's important to remember, if we have volunteers outside, we want to ensure that our safety and security team members are easily identifiable. Whether we have them wear a vest or a name tag, we want something that identifies them to our congregant, right? We want our congregates to know who to come to if there's a problem. If we do have security personnel or ushers and greeters in the parking lot, we want to make sure that we can communicate with them. And an easy way to do this is through the use of walkie-talkies or portable radios. And lastly, if we're going to hold any type of evening activities or events, we want to make sure that we have sufficient exterior lighting. Thanks,
Steve, thank you very much. And I, you emphasized the point Mark talked about, using the technology that we paid for to our benefit and not just using security cameras as after the fact, after an incident. So thank you. Mark, real quickly, Steve talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but all of us in law enforcement, after any event or after any critical incident, we always do what we call an after action report. What is really the importance? And if you could do this under 60 seconds, why is it important for our safety and security teams to get together afterwards and discuss the events of that first service?
Yeah, no, great question. After action reviews or critical self-assessments that follow either, critical events, they can follow drills, exercises, anything that requires a comprehensive and honest look at what happened and why. They are structured, They are constructive in nature, and they are critical in terms of the details. It is essential that the participants in the AAR be honest and candid, and again, keeping it constructive. And the reality is, this is how we learn. Individuals perform AARs on themselves all the time, in their daily interactions in life. What happened? Why did that interaction with that person go that way? Why did that transaction, end up, in a certain way? Organizations do the same thing. So this is a structured, critical, and constructive way to assess what happened and why, and then to make improvements moving forward.
Very good, Mark. Thank you. David, last question goes to you, sir. We did not spend a lot of time talking about cyber resources or security, but everyone should be thinking about that as well. We have many documents in our organization. What kind of advice can you give in a minute, 2 minutes about cybersecurity and the high holidays this year, sir?
Yeah, I think we get a lot of questions from synagogues and communities about, should we advertise our events? I say yes, we need to. We need to advertise it, but we need to consider how to do it safely. And so there are ways to do that. You can provide a mandated registration. If you want to come to one of our events, you must register. If you register, we'll give you more information about the event once you do that. So that's one tactic rather than just showing up. But if you have a way to ensure people have to register for your events, that's a safety mechanism. Also, have a robust password system for your facility and your staff. As I think David Wilson once told me, password should not be your password. So have a robust password system, especially for your employees. I know it's a culture change, but people will get used to it. You can force or mandate that their passwords are valid and secure. A lot of the threats we had this year came through the websites at our actual facilities, through the free form text boxes. So we're recommending that people don't let strangers or anyone just free form and just write a bunch of text or threats on your own website. So have drop-down menus, have other options that they can still communicate with you, and maybe say, if you have a question, leave us your phone number, we'll give you a call. So there's some ways to do that. Consider a members only login page for your staff so you can communicate more securely amongst each other. Train your staff on your social media policies. It's most organizations already have one, but if you don't, there's a lot of good policies out there that we could probably share with you that you could use for your facility. And Brad, you mentioned the documents. Yeah, we have some very good one-pagers. They're not very long, about cybersecurity, social media awareness, how to spot a phishing scam, and some other documents that we'll share as well. So thank you.
David, thank you very much. And thank you all for your contributions today and a very good, lively conversation today. We are 1 minute from closing. So I want to thank everybody for coming on today. Please keep in mind, next week, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, we will be talking about firearms and the faithful. And just look, we're talking about building an aware community. When we build an aware community, we build an empowered community, and the mission of SCN is to build a resilient community. So let us help you become a resilient community. So please stay tuned. Please register for all the webinars that are upcoming. Those of you that want the recording will get the recording and all the additional 15 documents we have today. With that, thank you very much, and we will see you next week. Take care.